First of all, I want to thank Rabbi Michael for contacting me, asking me to come and talk, because one of the things that I like about Rabbi Lerner is he's an inclusive person, and one of the things that our Abrahamic traditions suffer from is exclusivism. Many of the peoples that adhere to Abrahamic teachings, whether they be Jews, Christians, or Muslims, tend to see themselves as having some monopoly on the truth. And monopoly on the truth, as far as any real Abrahamic tradition would say, would be God's alone. And that's why arrogating the voice of God to oneself is probably the most dangerous and really the capital sin of people that claim God, to arrogate that voice. God, if we accept or even assume the possibility that He did speak, or the divine spoke through these revelations of the Old Testament or the Older Testament, the Newer Testament, and then the Quran, which each one has their claim. If we do accept that, there's certainly God has many voices. And to claim any one voice to be the exclusive voice of God is a very dangerous thing to do. But unfortunately, it's something that we tend to fall into. Human arrogance is a major problem. Pride is actually, interestingly enough, in Mount Purgatorio, in Dante's Purgatorio, pride is at the bottom. It's where you begin. You can't even start ascending the mountain. To get lust is the last one, by the way. But you can't even start ascending that mountain of purifying oneself until pride is dealt with. And religious tradition deals with pride greatly, but one of the major problems is that attempting to get close to God is something that necessitates humility, but at the same time, because so many people are very distant from their experience of the divine, it becomes very easy to start seeing yourself as somehow a cut above the rest when one's living a righteous life, or attempting to live a righteous life. When you see a lot of people out there who are living less than righteous lives, it becomes very easy to become arrogant about that, which is why that sin is just such a major focus in the Abrahamic traditions, the sin of pride. It's really the great sin. So just having said that, I honor Rabbi Lerner for doing that. And he asked me to talk about generosity in the Islamic tradition. And what intrigued me about that question of generosity, what is generosity? When you talk about generosity, we use words all the time, and we don't really think about what those words mean. Generosity in the Abrahamic tradition, certainly in the Islamic view, is one of the virtues. It's considered, in Arabic they say fada'il, one of the virtues. And fadl, which is the root word of the word for virtue, means to overflow, to pour out of, like the cup runneth over. Virtue is something that pours out of a virtuous heart. And generosity is a virtue, but if you really look, this is called generosity, Generous Sunday. The virtue of generosity is not a cardinal virtue in the Islamic tradition, and it's neither in the traditional Christian, and many of the Jewish ethicists would agree with this also. The cardinal virtue is actually courage. Generosity is actually considered a branch of courage. And the reason for that, people say, well, how is generosity related to courage? The reason people aren't generous is fear. That's really what's going on all over this planet. I mean, we're in this incredible zone of fear. And one of the things about humans, we are unique in our fear. We don't, as far as we know, there are no other species out there that have developed anxiolytic drugs like Valium to reduce fear. Jesus said if you had faith, you would go out like the birds in the morning and come back satiated in the evening. Birds are not anxious about losing their job. They don't really. They don't have 401k plans. They're not worried about what's going to happen when they get old. Who's going to look after them? But humans are. We're filled with fear. And one of the interesting things about our religious traditions is that they're actually designed to alleviate fear. I mean, that's what's so stunning about them, is that they're designed to teach people how to trust. And trust is difficult, especially when you've learned the bitter lesson of being betrayed. I mean, how many people were born into families in which that sacred covenant of parent-child relationship was betrayed because the mother was an alcoholic, or the father was abusive, or they abandoned them, or whatever reasons. Everybody has their stories and their experiences. And that first, according to Erickson, in his tradition in developmental psychology, that first crisis is trust versus mistrust. When a child cries, we used to have people in this culture that taught people to ignore the cries of a baby. No culture has ever done that before. I mean, that was some idiot who had a PhD in psychology that thought, gee, just ignore the cry of a baby. But when babies cry, my wife can distinguish. I'll hear them crying and I'll start to panic. She said, no, it's okay. I know that cry. He's just upset because a toy got taken away or something. So she distinguishes between the cries of her children. She knows when it's a cry that she has to respond to immediately, and when it's a cry, she can go into her conflict resolution mode and go down and deal with. I mean, if we let mothers deal with all of these global problems, really they would be resolved, because they're brilliant. They're doing conflict resolution every day. Every day. I see it every day. And what's it about? It's about sharing. It's about caring. It's about teaching them what's mine, what's not mine, boundaries, borders. Boundaries are really important in households. Just learning about boundaries and what's privacy and the need for people to have boundaries honored. And when we go and we take national boundaries that people take very seriously and we aggress upon them, neighbors will get very upset.